think we kind of skipped around a little bit, but I wanted to talk about question number 3 a little bit. This actually goes back to the previous quarter study that we were doing with Andrew, because one of the things we talked about, at least in some of the classes, was the fact that we as people have long pondered the question, why are we here? What is our purpose as people, as humans? And so this book appears to attempt to answer that age-old question of why are we here? What is the purpose? What is the meaning of life for us? And the Holy Spirit, through this particular author, takes a somewhat unique approach, as opposed to just telling us what is the purpose, coming right out and just making a direct statement about it. It really approaches it more from the perspective of trying or testing a number of different things. I say somewhat unique approach because it's not the only time that we find something like that. There are statements in the Psalms, statements in the Proverbs that seem to kind of lend themselves to that idea. And I would suggest the book of Haggai that we studied recently with Cameron Piner when he was here also deals with that idea, because one of the things God does in that book over and over again is he says to them, consider your ways. And the point of him saying that is, look at the way things have been going for you and the way you've been living, and ask yourself what the common factor is in all that. You've been living life your way. You've been focusing your attention on what you want and what you need instead of serving me. And the end result is your fields and your harvests have come up short, your storehouses are empty, and life's kind of miserable for you. So how does that feel? How does that seem like it's working out for you, is essentially what God's saying. And then he says, essentially, try it my way and see if I will not fill up your storehouses and finish the harvests for the fields that you've sown that still haven't been harvested yet. If I will not give you an abundance of the things that you're longing for, just try it my way. And so I've said before in looking at that book, essentially what God's saying is, you've been doing things your way and it hasn't worked out so well. Why don't you try it my way and see how that goes for you? And so God allows us essentially to test his ways and is asking the people of Haggai to do that. There's some sense in which the book of Ecclesiastes takes that approach to this question of what is the meaning of life? Instead of just coming right out and saying, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is, as we know the conclusion, what? Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole of man, or this is the whole duty of man, depending on the translation that you're using. We know what the conclusion of the book is because we've all read this. But instead of coming right out in the beginning and saying, what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is to fear God and keep his commandments. This is your whole duty. This is who you were created to be. And just ending with that, I mean, if we started with that, we could just say, well, we've already answered the question, we're done, and we can move on. But that's not what he does. That's not how he approaches it. The Holy Spirit instead takes the approach of trying or allowing the author to try and to observe a number of different things as perhaps ways to fulfill the meaning of life and to satisfy us and to make us feel accomplished. What are some of those ways that he tries or that he looks at from an experiential point of view? I don't even know if that's really a word or not, but anyway. You know what I'm trying to say.
He tries all kinds of things for wealth. Okay,
so possessions. You've heard the old saying, money can't buy you happiness. I've heard some recent advertisement on the radio dealing with the idea that, well, money might not buy you happiness, but money does buy you this, and people who do this are usually pretty happy, and so maybe you can just buy yourself this and see if it makes you happy or not. So, but I mean, the reality is we understand, can money really satisfy? No, but do people try it? And do people seem to think, well, if I just had more, I'd be satisfied, I'd be happy, I'd be content? I mean, people think that, and they try that, and typically it doesn't work out. And we'll talk about some of the reasons that is. I keep trying to avoid getting into the last question. I've mentioned it kind of briefly, but I really want us to think about it when we get there, and so I don't want to jump on it too much. But money is one of the ways. Wealth, possessions. What else? Knowledge. He specifically refers to it as wisdom, but the two go hand in hand somewhat. I mean, there is a prerequisite of having some form of information in order to be able to exercise wisdom in whatever area that it is that we're talking about. And so knowledge and wisdom, though they're not synonymous per se, they do go hand in hand. Knowledge is essential for being able to exercise wisdom in some sense. But wisdom or knowledge, the accumulation of information. And there are people, perhaps you've known someone, I know I've known many people, who we talk about being lifelong students. And sometimes that's a compliment, lifelong students of the Bible, lifelong students of a lot of different things. That doesn't necessarily mean that is their entire focus, but we've all known people who've made it their aim to try to know as much as they could possibly know. Maybe have continued to go to school long after they've had multiple PhDs just to get another PhD because they want to learn about this aspect of something or whatever. So the accumulation of knowledge, people try to use that as a means of satisfying them and finding purpose in their life. And we'll talk about in this chapter here, in one of the later questions, some of the reasons why that is futility or vanity. What else? Gardens, orchards, and vineyards. So there's some sense in which we could lump that in with possessions, but it's not necessarily the same thing. Gardens, orchards, and vineyards could refer to, there are people that like horticulture. They like plants. We have one with us. She loves her roses. Do you like your roses because they make you rich? You like your roses because they're beautiful and they smell wonderful and you enjoy working in them. So there are people who enjoy that. Arlene's one of those people who enjoys working in plants and specifically in roses. And her roses are fantastic. Go buy a knockout rose at Lowe's and then let Arlene bring you one of her roses and you'll see that there is absolutely zero comparison between the two. Knockout roses are wonderful if you have no interest in having to work with them and just let them grow and continue to bloom. They can be pretty, but they really don't have the same aesthetic value and smell, all of those wonderful things that Arlene's roses have because her roses take work and there's benefit to that. And so she enjoys that, finds joy in it, but is that the meaning of life for you? Are your roses, if something happened and all your rose bushes burned down, your life would just be over, wouldn't it? No, I mean, it's not her purpose. It's not what she finds meaning in. She enjoys it, but there are people who seek out those things. Think about the Babylonian kings and the hanging gardens of Babylon, partially to show their wealth, partially just, there are so many things in this world that are designed for our visual enjoyment, and that's okay, but it is not going to satisfy the purpose of life. Yes?
Well, another way that I interpreted the gardens, I think some translations say parks, and gardens and parks typically carry with them some kind of a historical marker as well. So I saw, the houses and parks that kings make tend to become monuments, and they leave behind a legacy of that king. So
Okay.
I interpreted the gardens and the parks as him saying, I was trying to build something that would be a legacy or something that would be a monument that would be remembered as
something that would stand beyond me, that could be a remembrance of who I was and what I accomplished. So we could lump the gardens and all of those things in with wealth. We could also lump it in perhaps with another aspect that he talks about of ways that people try to find meaning, which is what? And I think what Andrew's saying kind of can be lumped in with that idea. What? Notoriety, popularity, fame, being remembered or well known. We saw back earlier in the questions the fact that there is no remembrance of the things that are past, and there will be no remembrance of the things that are coming in the future. And so kings and other important people have tried to make their mark on history in some way, either through actions or through monuments that get left, so that they are remembered for generations to come. And so fame, notoriety, legacy is another way that people try to find the meaning of life. Any others you can think of? I think we have missed at least one. Yes?
Two opposites that you could explore. One is hard work and labor.
Okay.
And then the other is lavish leisure.
Okay, so there's the aspect of working really hard. And we could look at that and say, well, that's about making money, or that's about gaining notoriety, but not always. There are people who are just workaholics, who the reason why they are workaholics is because they find satisfaction, fulfillment, accomplishment, appreciation from others in the work that they do. And so it's not necessarily for the money. They're not looking to get rich. It's not necessarily for the notoriety from the perspective of they hope generations of people will remember them. You know, long after they're gone, the company will have a monument to them to remind people of how great they were. They just find fulfillment in the actual work itself and in the appreciation that is gained by the recognition for that work right now while they're alive. And so there are people who see that. And Andrew pointed out another aspect of it that maybe is a little more subtle, and we might miss it if we're not paying attention. But if he looks at work and all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, then, and he says it's all vanity of vanities and like grasping for the wind, then the other thing to try is what? I mean, he mentioned it, lavish leisure. I even like the alliteration. But, I mean, if work is a big waste of time and we don't find satisfaction in it, then, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll just kick back and do nothing. I won't be involved in any of that stuff. I'll just relax, and whatever I find I want to do, I'll just go do it. There can be an aspect of trying to find fulfillment in that. And there are people, again, who have tried that. They've said, well, you know, I didn't find any satisfaction in the work in work life, so I've just decided I'm going to be a nomad and live on the land and do whatever I want to do and whenever I want to do it and not worry about anything. And so that is another aspect of life that people have tried through which to find fulfillment. Okay, I still think there's at least one more. We may have alluded to it somewhat, but I don't think we've actually nailed it yet, and it's a big one. Chapter 2. And others, but the first real mention of its chapter is kind of, I don't know, second, third, maybe into the first third of chapter 2. I'll let you find it.
Would be the physical pleasures?
Physical pleasures.
Wine or
Pleasures, wine, sex, a number of different things people have used as a means of finding physical satisfaction. And there are people who have thought the meaning of life is to be found in doing whatever feels good to you. whatever brings pleasure to your body or to your mind, or whatever other sensation that you're seeking fulfillment in. You just, whatever gives you pleasure, allow yourself to indulge in that and to be satisfied with that. That is the meaning of life. And so that's another aspect that people, as far back as Solomon tried, I think we could probably find examples of it even before that. And certainly continue to try even to this day. Men are not different. There is nothing new under the sun. We still try the same old things. Look at the world around us. Do you really see anything new beyond the things that we've just talked about in Ecclesiastes? Maybe some variation of it, but is there really anything new through which men and women are trying to find meaning in life today in 2024? I'm not trying to get you to agree with me. If there's something else, please share. I don't think there is. I think those pretty well wrap up the majority, if not all, of the ways that people seek satisfaction today. There is one, we've already mentioned the conclusion of the matter, which is the true meaning of life and the true way in which we find fulfillment. But these are the ways that people seek outside of spiritual things and a relationship with God. They sought them in Solomon's day. As I said, I think it was probably true they sought them before Solomon's day. And it's just as true now. Solomon lived around about 950 BC. So what is that? Almost 3,000 years ago. We're getting close enough I can round up to 3,000. Almost 3,000 years ago, and people are still seeking the same things. Still seeking fulfillment in the same ways. Do they bring satisfaction? Short term. As Moses recognized in Hebrews chapter 11, the passing pleasures of sin. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there is pleasure in sin. We don't like to say that because sin is bad, and sin is very bad. But one of the reasons sin is so dangerous is because there is passing pleasure that comes with sin. And when we say passing pleasure, I don't necessarily want us to get a picture of, and I don't think we do, the idea that it's only for a moment in the sense of a real moment. In the sense of eternity, it's only a moment. But the point is, there is pleasure to be had in sin, or it probably wouldn't be that tempting in the first place. There is pleasure to be had in having a lot of things. I would like a jet ski. I would like an airplane. There are lots of things I could find a great deal of pleasure in having, possessing. There is pleasure in sexual relations outside of marriage, or people wouldn't be doing it so much. The problem is that exercising those pleasures and seeking satisfaction in those pleasures is an empty, vain, futile pursuit, because none of those things can fill you up. Ashley, I think, in her answers to the questions, quoted Augustine, or Augustine, depending on who you ask, who was one of the early fathers, considered one of the early church fathers, an early writer, an early Christian during the early centuries of the church. And he made the statement that essentially there is a God-shaped hole in every one of us. And it is my belief that God created it that way. There is a hole that is within us that needs to find fulfillment. It needs to be satisfied. And the reality is that we can fill it up with everything else, and it will never be full. It will never be satisfied, because it is a hole that is intended, it is a place in our souls, in our spirits, that is intended for God alone. And the reality is, so many statements in Scripture deal with this idea. If you want to enjoy the things of this life, what must you do first? To really enjoy, to truly find satisfaction in them, what must you do first? So we've already said all these things don't satisfy. It doesn't mean there's nothing to be enjoyed in them, and it doesn't mean they're ultimately all completely fruitless and futile. Forgot to silence my watch. But what must we do first if we truly want them to be satisfying in the way that we might be seeking after? What's the conclusion of the whole matter?
To know that there is a God.
To fear God and to keep His commandments. We have to put God first. Jesus in Matthew chapter 6 said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you." Does God want us to find enjoyment and fulfillment in life? Does He want us to be satisfied with a good day's labor? Yeah, Solomon will talk about that. The writer will talk about that. Does He want us to be satisfied with our husband or our wife? Does He want us to find fulfillment, satisfaction in that relationship?
Yes.
Absolutely. Does he want us to leave a legacy? Yes. Maybe not the kind of legacy we've talked about, but He wants us to leave a legacy. But how is all of that stuff truly obtained? When you surrender, when you empty yourself of yourself and surrender yourself to God, every other aspect of life we can find satisfaction and we can find fulfillment in, even in the midst of the difficulties that this life has for us to face and to struggle through. We can find fulfillment when we surrender to God. Doesn't mean everything's going to be a primrose path. I guess we're going to talk about roses a lot this morning. Primrose is not exactly the same thing, but anyway. Doesn't mean everything's going to be easy. No hardships, no troubles. Those are certainly going to come. And the problem is, if you're focused on all this other stuff, and this is your meaning and purpose, when those struggles come, what do you have to go to? I mean, you try to fill it up with more of that. Does He get rid of the trouble? I mean, people have tried this for generations, thousands of years with drugs and alcohol and pleasure and other addictions. They have poured themselves into that addiction. They find temporary relief and temporary pleasure. But when they come out of it, what happens to the problems that they had before they went into it? It's still there, and more frequently than not, what is true? Think about it. They've multiplied the problems. There are more problems. So they not only still have all the problems they had before they indulged themselves in whatever it is that they're addicted to, they come out of that, they still have those problems, and now they have multiplied the problems. There are even more problems because of the addiction and the things that are caused by that. And so it doesn't satisfy, it doesn't fulfill, it doesn't take away, and it adds to. And that is the nature of sin and why it's so ugly. Sin is like a cancer or a gangrene, depending on the translation that you are using. But the idea is that it grows worse and worse all the time. And it makes our life, it empties our life more and more of the beauty that God intends for us to have. Joy, you had something?
If we were to, in some ways, equate satisfaction with peace,
Yes.
a really good verse is Isaiah 26:3. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you, because he trusts in you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great passage for peace. One of the other ones I think of is Philippians 4, 6 and 7, that deals with the idea of when we take our prayers and petitions to God to do so with thanksgiving. And then verse 7 says, and the peace of God which surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. And I know many of us have experienced that before. We've had some struggle, something that we couldn't do anything about, and we've taken it to the Lord, and it doesn't mean He immediately takes it away, but there is a peace that comes from knowing that we have given it to one who cares about us deeply, more than anybody else, and that He is on our side and wants what's best for us, and that He ultimately is capable of doing whatever is necessary to help us to get through it. Whether that is helping us to endure and to bear up underneath it, or it is taking it away. Whatever it is, there is a peace that comes from giving such things to God and knowing that He now has it in His grasp and will deal with it appropriately. So, satisfaction comes in knowing God, and it is through that we can find true satisfaction in all the other aspects of life in which we are to be engaged. Okay, so we've given all these different things. How is the writer of this book seemingly uniquely qualified to look at all of these different things? Because it's one thing. I talked about this the first time I went to Moldova. Moldova is the poorest country in Europe. I think that's still the case. And to give you some idea, a college professor in Moldova makes $100 US a month. That's their salary. We can hardly imagine making $100 a month. It is such that in Moldova, in the wintertime, it can be a question of, do you pay the bill so that you can have heat, or do you go buy food so you can eat? We can't imagine what that's like. Imagine a rich, in American standards, I'm not necessarily rich, but imagine a rich American, of which all of us in this room, compared to a Moldovan, are rich. I had to look in my closet this morning and decide which of my 5 suits I was going to put on. They don't have to worry about that. They know what they're going to wear for Sunday because they have one outfit. So, I mean, it's no question. They don't have to worry about that. So imagine me, a rich American, going over there and preaching a lesson to them about Philippians 4 and contentment. Being content whether you have a lot or have a little. That seemed like a very good idea. I think that's going to be received from a Moldovan, from me, in the same way that it might be received from somebody who lives there, who's struggling the same way and yet seems to be content with the little bit that they have. Who do you think they're going to be more open to listen to? Me or the person who's struggling? Person who's struggling. Why? Why is that? Does it change the truth?
No, but people, I'm trying to kind of put what I'm thinking. They would they would listen to the person who's struggling because they know that the individual knows what it's like.
Yeah, to go back to the old cliche statement that I know some of us get tired of hearing because it's used ad nauseum, is people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. Do I care about the poverty of Moldovans? Yeah, but can I possibly understand their plight the way somebody who struggles that way does? I can't possibly understand it. I have never been that much in want or in need of something. So I can't possibly understand on the same level. And so I think the same thing when we look in the New Testament. When Paul goes to a church who's struggling under persecution, violent persecution, and says to them, bear up under these trials, be faithful, be steadfast, be immovable. That mean anything to them coming from Paul? He have any idea what it's like to suffer persecution? Absolutely, everywhere he went. That's what he faced. I mean, he faced it likely more than any of them did, or most of them did. So he understood it. I could preach the same truth but I have no idea what that really feels like to experience that. And so again, we have a tendency to listen to someone who doesn't just have head knowledge, they have heart knowledge. They understand with their heart what it is that I'm going through in my life. It doesn't change the truth of it, but it does make it a little easier for me to stomach the message coming from them. Because it's really easy for me as an American to go over there and preach a lesson on Philippians 4 to a bunch of poor Moldovans about you should be content with whatever you have. Oh, well, yeah, that's easy for you to say. You had to look in your closet and decide which of your 5 suits you were going to put on this morning. You get to go to your refrigerator and decide which of all the meals that your wife has bought food for the week you're going to eat for tonight. We get to go to our fridge and just figure out what we're going to have because that's all that's left. And so it's much easier to listen to someone who has both head knowledge and heart knowledge. And so here's a person who has the ability to try all of these things. You know, they were in a position as king, they could work really hard. And if it was Solomon, Solomon built a whole lot of monuments to himself. The temple was a big one. His palace was a big one. The throne itself, I don't know if you remember the description of the throne, but all the gold that all the stuff was overlaid with. I picture the lions leading up the steps to the throne. I mean, it must have been magnificent to look at and to wonder at the wealth and the ability to create something like that, to fashion something so beautiful. The temple, with all of the gold that it was overlaid with, was magnificent. No wonder the people in Haggai's day who had seen the temple of Solomon wept when the foundations of the new temple were laid. It looked like nothing compared to what Solomon created. And so all of those things Solomon did. And other kings had other monuments that they built. So whether it was Solomon or somebody else, they had the ability to create those monuments that would be long-lasting, that would remind people of the stamp that they made on Judah or Israel at the time that they were alive. Solomon, if he was the one who wrote this, we're told that in Solomon's day, silver was valued as what? You remember? It was useless because it was no more valuable than gravel, rocks. I mean, it was useless. I mean, it had no value whatsoever. That was how wealthy Solomon's kingdom was. Silver was worthless. And so they had the money. They could buy or build anything they wanted to. Did Solomon have the ability to enjoy pleasure? Whether it was physical or wine or anything else. Did he have the ability to enjoy that? He and other prosperous kings in the kingdom of Israel or Judah, they have the ability to enjoy those things? Yes. Did he have a station? Did they have a station in which if they decided that all this work was too much and it really wasn't satisfying anything, I'm just going to do nothing? Could they have done nothing? Absolutely. So it doesn't matter which aspect of this we're looking at, they had the ability to try it. And if it was Solomon, it was said of Solomon that with regard to wisdom, what? God made him wiser than all who were before him. So Solomon had the wisdom to know. The Queen of Sheba came and even wondered at the wisdom of Solomon. And so Solomon and other kings in Jerusalem had the ability to try all of these things. And so when they say these things don't satisfy, it's not like me saying, well, you know, having a jet plane is not going to satisfy you. It's just not going to fill you up. It's not going to fulfill you. It's easy for me to say, I don't have a jet plane. So I'm not satisfied with not having a jet plane. But anyway, so you look at all those things. They could have tried them. They could have experienced them. I had Jim and then Joyce.
Yeah, these good things you said about Solomon, that's what makes life worthwhile. He started life right, and he was happy. God was happy with him. He gave him wisdom and all these things. His life was long, he goofed up. And if you don't follow God and put him first, life is not worthwhile. It's like Jesus said about Judah, she'd be better off if he hadn't been born.
Born at all, that's right. And that, I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, it's not that there is not enjoyment in these things. And it's not even that God doesn't want us to find enjoyment in these things or satisfaction in these things. It's just that he doesn't want this to be the purpose of our life. And the reason, again, is not because God is some egotistical creator and ruler who just wants what he wants, and he is sovereign, so we should bow down and do what he wants. It is because, and you can say it's the way we were made, whatever. I don't care what your approach is to it. It is because God knows that ultimately it is the only way we can truly be happy, is to do things his way. He is the creator and therefore knows what is in our best interest at every turn. And the more we are willing to surrender ourselves to him and trust him, the more satisfaction we will find in the life that we live now, and the more fulfilling it will be when we get to be with him eternally. Yes, ma'am.
With gaining everything that you think is so important, there's a big responsibility that comes after you get it,
Yes.
with what you do with it.
Right.
And I know this is a frivolous thing, but I was thinking about my garage and all the things I've gathered over 86 years.
Right.
Because mainly when I was young, I was poor. I was very poor.
Right.
So I appreciated a lot of things that were entirely useless.
Right.
Now I have a lot of things that are still entirely useless, and they're all in boxes.
Right.
Now maybe sometime I will give them to somebody else that doesn't know they're useless.
Right. And they'll find something to do with
So
them.
I think maybe that's the way Solomon felt. He looked at it and then he thought, why did I do this? Now what am I going to do with it all?
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, most of us have a house full of junk we don't ever touch. I mean, that's just the reality. I mean, there obviously is furniture and other utensils that we use daily or regularly, but there are a whole lot of things in most of our homes that don't get any use whatsoever. And at some point, we probably thought that was important and we really needed it, but we're not using it now. And so we have all accumulated all this stuff. And it's just one of the vanities of life. And if you were finding satisfaction in all of that stuff and piling up all that stuff, you're going to find yourself buried under all of that stuff, and it's all going to be useless. It's all waste. The whole of life is a waste without God. Okay, I really want to get through this set of questions because I'd like to start on the second lesson on Wednesday, and we're down to like 3 minutes. So let's go to question number 4. Why does he say the eye is not satisfied with hearing, nor the ear filled with hearing? And is this just about seeing and hearing, or is there something deeper here? What does he mean the eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear with hearing? Yes, sir.
Maybe on a more literal level.
Yeah.
You cannot if you have hearing, you can't maximize the amount that your brain can take in and hear.
Okay.
You think you've heard so much in your life, well, tomorrow you'll hear something else.
Okay.
There'll always be more capacity to hear. It's not a data bank that eventually gets full and you can't hear anything else.
Let me ask you, have any of you seen everything you want to see? Have you heard every sound you would like to hear? Have you touched everything you would like to touch? Okay, make a bucket list of things you want to see, hear, and touch. Now, if you see all those things, hear all those things, and touch all those things, will you be satisfied? Will you have seen everything you want to see? No. The eye cannot be satisfied. And the second question, let's answer that. Is it just about seeing and hearing? I've already added touch. Or is it about something much deeper? I think it's about something much deeper. The reality is, physical sensations, no matter what they are, seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, isn't there one more? Smelling. Oh, I forgot that one because it's convenient, because there's lots of things I don't want to smell. So you got those five senses. None of our physical senses are satisfied with fulfilling them. Guess why? Because the flesh cannot be satisfied without the guidance of the Spirit. And the guidance of the Spirit requires what? I mean, true guidance of the Spirit. I know there are lots of spiritual people out there. True guidance of the Spirit requires a relationship with the Creator God. And so the only way to truly be physically satisfied, whether it's seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, is through ultimately the control of the Spirit that requires a relationship with the eternal Creator God. I mean, that's the reality. And so the eye is not satisfied with seeing. The ear is not satisfied or filled with hearing. None of those things are going to be satisfied. So I think there were a couple of questions. Where did I skip them about wisdom? Are they not here? Are they in the next set of questions? I thought I had some questions in here about wisdom. What conclusions? Oh, what conclusions? I thought that was just about the experience part. Yeah. So we will start there on Wednesday because I think there are some important observations about wisdom that are here in the end of chapter 1. We'll start there briefly. That's my briefly, which means it might be 20 minutes. And then we'll go into chapter 2, or questions for lesson 2. So if you haven't gotten those yet, those are back there. And since we're starting those on Wednesday, I will have questions for the third lesson out on Wednesday night, just so if you're one of those people who likes to get ahead, you can do that. But we probably won't get to them for a couple weeks. So I didn't need to mention, I am going to be gone the first 2 Wednesdays and the first Sunday in May for Haley's graduation, if the Lord wills. And so I will need a couple of people who are willing to teach for those classes. Questions are already made up, so if you want those ahead of time just to get prepared, just let me know if you're willing to teach those classes, one or any of them.